Hello, today we are going to rant about the topic of assessment in education. Most of us are used to being assessed as students in schools. We write exams, take quizzes, do homework, and much more. We tend to associate the ideas of assessment with final exams and stressful periods of test taking and studying. Generally, assessment tends to be seen as a negative experience for most students, and in our opinion, doesn't really help learning. However, educators still seem to think assessment is a necessary aspect of formal education. Our goal is to talk about different areas of assessment, such as standardized tests and their unintended consequences, the limitations that current standards and assessment create for teachers, and the emotional connections students make with their grades.
One area of educational assessment that appears to be quite flawed is the use of standardized tests in schooling. Andrade and Brookhart highlight that traditionally, standardized tests have been implemented to regulate student grades and are used to determine how much knowledge and understanding students have acquired. However, such tests have several consequences and disadvantages. According to Klenowski and Wyatt Smith, some of these disadvantages include the narrowing of the curriculum as teachers teach only what is to be tested, the neglect of curriculum areas that are not tested, time spent on coaching and practice tests, participation by schools in perverse practices designed to improve achievement data, the neglect of higher order thinking skills that are difficult to assess in paper and pencil formats, and the negative impacts on teachers, including public perceptions of the standing and quality of the profession. Teachers only teaching material that is being tested and neglecting other areas of the curriculum is a very unfortunate reality that devalues the content of the curriculum and contradicts the underlying value that the knowledge being taught in schools is important in and of itself. If certain content is skimmed over or skipped because it is not being tested, this sends the message to students that the material is not truly valuable and encourages them to just focus on doing well on the test. Naturally, it makes sense that teachers would want their students to do well, considering the pressure that is on them from school boards and parents, as well as knowing their students likely desire the same. The combination of these pressures, with the rigid use of standards and standardized tests, has led to teachers taking class time to train their students in the art of taking tests, as well as manipulating certain practices to improve student outcomes. These actions take the focus of education off the individual improvement of students and place it on the results of their assessments, so much to the point that class time is being taken away from other areas of learning to produce desirable outcomes. This practice reflects negatively on teachers, making them appear to be more focused on how their students' performance reflects on them rather than what on students are actually learning. As argued by Andrade and Brookhart, classroom assessment should be used to collect feedback about student progress and prompt change to improve the learning process, rather than just being used as tangible evidence of what looks like successful teaching on paper.
The last two disadvantages brought up by Klenowski and Wyatt Smith are also limitations that current assessment practices have created for teachers, which is our next topic. When testing students in the manner that their answers can be decided as either right or wrong, teachers become very limited in what they can test. This also takes away from students' abilities to express everything that they know about the course content and encourages students to only know what they think will be counted as right. Because of this, many students likely ignore the detail of the material, stopping them from thinking more in depth about the content. This is a very inaccurate way to prepare students for life and work outside of school and promotes the attitude of only doing as much as is necessary. Reducing assessment to that which can be easily marked and compared to a standard also makes the act of teaching appear to be less individualized and skill based. This can cause the perception of the profession to be devalued and make it appear that the teacher is not an important aspect of the learning and grading process. In addition to these points, teachers face many other limitations in their profession as a result of current assessment practices. In Klonowski and Wyatt Smith's chapter, it discusses the four types of standards that we have. There are content standards, achievement standards, development standards, and merit standards. These standards affect which type of assessment teachers use in education, as was discussed earlier. Generally, we tend to see teachers grade based off of assessments like homework, quizzes, and exams. Gootsey and Link describe these types of assessments as evidence of cognitive achievement and achievement or learning process behaviors. They also discuss how even though new teachers are taught about a variety of assessment types and have knowledge about how to assess students in a variety of ways, unfortunately most teachers tend to replicate what their more experienced colleagues do when assessing students. The norms that are present in a school tend to dictate what type of assessment teachers actually implement, excluding the other possible methods.
DeLuca and Valera discuss the increasing pressures on teachers to assess students proficiently, which can cause new teachers to change the types of assessments they use. Although newer teachers may have a more contemporary understanding of effective assessment and grading practices upon entering the profession, they often shift to more standardized approaches to meet expected accountability demands in the education system. However, it appears that the factors teachers tend to value in assessment are not truly helping students learn. Rather, they are helping students to perform well in tests. In addition to assessment norms already in place in schools, there are other factors related to race, gender, socioeconomic status, and prior achievement levels that affect assessment. Andrade and Brookhart discuss how some of these factors can have a large impact on student success related to grades and assessment. Many students who come from a lower socioeconomic status have to work or are missing school because of their family situations which are out of their control. If teachers are forced to assess all students the same way based on these standards, it can really limit how much they are able to help students coming from these backgrounds to succeed in school. If these students continually get bad grades or do not do as well in school because they are coming to school underfed or overtired, it can create a negative connection to grades and assessment, which can later affect their perceptions of school and motivation towards it.
This relates to our last topic, which is about the emotional connection students have with their assessments and their grades. According to Netka and Sundstrom, students have both positive and negative emotional connections with grades and exams. Some of the positive perceptions students can have are that assessments can be fair, enjoyable, or challenging. However, the majority of student perceptions seem to be negative, that assessment causes feelings like stress, anger, pressure, and that testing can be irrelevant to student learning. Most exams and quizzes have to be taken on a certain day at a certain time and tend to be more high stakes for students, which can cause a lot of test anxiety and stress. This can lead to bad performance on the day of the test, which does not accurately show what the students have learned, but rather how well they perform on this certain day. If students enter a test or assessment with the feeling that the test may be invalid, unimportant, or unfair, generally they are not motivated to perform their best on the assessment, which could result in wrong answers based on lack of motivation. In an article by Nedka and Sundstrom, they focus on a national test in the country of Sweden. The students who were interviewed about this exam said that because the test was deemed important or high stakes, that they studied hard and put in a good effort. But for a low stakes test like the practice field test, most students said they didn't put in effort or care. This reveals how students decide if something is important or not based on how much it will affect their grades, rather than caring about learning or the knowledge they might gain. In my high school experience, when I continually got bad grades after working hard in a class, I just assumed that I would never be good at those subjects and didn't try as hard in those classes. The reality is that for many students, grades have become a factor of demotivation. We believe that having a set prescribed standard that narrows the definition of success to very particular outcomes can be damaging to students' mindsets about school and devalue diversity in classrooms. In an article by Keller, it discusses how students who performed similarly in grade 6 were graded differently, awarding some students higher grades than others. The study followed these students and showed a positive influence in test scores 2 years later for the students who were given inflated grades previously. This research shows the strong influence that grades can have on future work ethic and motivation. If students are graded poorly on something they have worked very hard on and put considerable effort into improving, this can be emotionally damaging and destructive towards the work they do in the future. When assessed this way, students are asked to regurgitate exactly what teachers want or what satisfies the standards. However, if some students can't do this, it can easily lead to students having negative views about themselves and their abilities, which can be very destructive for their future learning. Based on the research we have done, we strongly believe that there are tangible ways to improve assessment.
One view we hold strongly is that teachers should be given greater autonomy when grading their students, or at least that grading criteria should be more flexible based on individuals. We believe the primary goal when students are young should be to instill a positive mindset towards learning and set them up to do well when it really matters. Students need to be motivated during the early stages of education in order to establish good work ethic and positive self perception. These habits will follow students through adulthood and into their future careers. This can be linked to the educational psychology of constructivism, which promotes that a teacher's role should be to individualize education and find the best way for each student to learn. It also relates to the educational philosophy of progressivism by giving students the skills to cope with their future and keep their education more individualized so they have a better chance of succeeding. However, it might not be practical for teachers to have a completely individualized program for each student, but giving teachers more flexibility with grading and creating assessment for their classes is definitely something that should be considered in education. We also believe this would give students the best chance for future success in any path they choose to follow. I'm Emily Hazine.
And I'm Emma Beezer. Thanks for listening to our rant on educational assessment.
If you want to know more about anything that we discussed in this rant, please feel free to check out our awesome sources.